Most people think manipulation is obvious. They picture someone scheming, calculating, visibly untrustworthy, someone you would notice immediately and step away from. The reality is almost the opposite. The most effective manipulators do not look manipulative at all. They look caring. They look funny. They look generous, supportive, reasonable, and sometimes even like the most loyal person in your life. By the time you notice what has been happening, they have already influenced decisions you thought were entirely your own. The reason manipulation is so difficult to detect is not that people are foolish. It is that manipulation is specifically designed to work around the parts of your mind that would normally catch it. It targets your empathy, your desire for approval, your natural trust in people who seem to care about you, and your deeply human need to be liked and accepted. Understanding how it works is not about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone around you. It is about recognizing patterns that deserve a closer look. Here are the signs that someone might be manipulating you, and, more importantly, the psychological reasons why these tactics work so well. Subscribe to Freud Mind, and let us get into it. The first sign is one that often goes unrecognized for a long time because it does not feel like manipulation. It feels like confusion. You start questioning your own memory. You're certain that a specific conversation happened, that something was said, that an event occurred in a particular way. And then the other person tells you it did not, as though your memory is simply wrong. This is called gaslighting, a term that comes from a 1944 film in which a husband deliberately manipulates his wife into doubting her own perception of reality. In practice, it sounds like, "That never happened, you are imagining things. You're being too sensitive, I never said that." And here is the part that makes it so insidious. Confidence is convincing. When someone states something with absolute certainty and without any apparent doubt, the human brain interprets that confidence as a signal of accuracy. Because in most social situations, people who are certain tend to be certain for a reason. A skilled gaslighter exploits this by being completely confident about things that are simply not true. Over time, repeated denial of your experiences and perceptions creates a cumulative effect. You begin to trust your own memory less. You start adding qualifications. Maybe I am remembering it wrong. Maybe I am overreacting. Not because the evidence supports those qualifications, but because you have been told so many times that your perception is unreliable. A person who doubts their own perception is significantly easier to influence than one who trusts themselves. The antidote is not argument. Arguing with a skilled gaslighter rarely produces clarity. The antidote is documentation. Write things down, keep records, talk to people outside the relationship. When your memory is corroborated by evidence or outside perspective, the doubt becomes considerably harder to maintain. The second sign is closely related and builds on the same dynamic. With a manipulative person, you may notice that no matter what goes wrong between the two of you, the fault somehow lands on you. They have an explanation for everything that they did, a way of reframing every conflict, so that your response to their behavior becomes the problem, rather than the behavior itself. The psychology here operates through a mechanism called attribution. Humans naturally look for explanations when something goes wrong. Manipulators exploit this by providing an explanation before you have had a chance to process what happened, and that explanation consistently positions you as the problem. Over time, this can produce a strange effect where you find yourself apologizing for things that were done to you, because the framing has been so consistently presented from one direction that you have unconsciously absorbed it. A useful check here is to pay attention to patterns over time. Everyone deflects blame occasionally. This is a normal human defense mechanism. What is different with manipulation is the absence of genuine accountability, the complete pattern of never being responsible, and the consistency with which the other person emerges from conflicts as either innocent or victimized. If you can remember a single occasion where this person genuinely acknowledged fault and apologized without qualification, That matters. If you cannot, that also matters. Why does your brain fall for blame shifting? Because human beings are wired to maintain social bonds, and social bonds require some degree of taking the other person's perspective. When someone we care about tells us we have caused a problem, our first instinct is to examine whether they might be right, because caring relationships involve accountability. Manipulators exploit this willingness to self-examine by treating it as a permanent one-way street. Your willingness to consider their perspective becomes a mechanism they use to avoid ever considering yours. The third sign is guilt as a control mechanism. You say no to something, and instead of the other person accepting that boundary, something shifts. The response might be, "If you really cared about me," or "After everything I have done for you," or simply a pained withdrawal, a heavy sigh, a face that communicates deep disappointment. No direct argument, just the unmistakable communication that your no has caused damage. The psychological lever being pulled here is one of the most effective ones available to a manipulator because it does not feel like manipulation. It feels like guilt. And guilt is a genuinely useful emotion in healthy relationships. It exists to signal that we may have acted in a way that has harmed someone we care about, and to motivate repair of that harm. In a healthy relationship, guilt is proportionate and appropriate. You feel guilty when you have actually done something harmful, and the feeling motivates genuine repair. Manipulative guilt is different. It is triggered not by actual harm, but by any deviation from what the manipulator wants. The message is that your desires, your boundaries, your right to decline are causing harm simply by existing. And because guilt is an unpleasant experience that most people want to resolve quickly, the easiest resolution often looks like giving in, which is precisely the intended outcome. The question to ask is not, am I making them feel bad? Their feelings are their own to manage. But have I actually done something wrong by making this choice? The fourth sign initially feels like a positive development, which is part of what makes it effective. Someone who has been fairly neutral suddenly becomes warm, generous, and complimentary. There are unexpected acts of kindness, compliments that feel genuine and flattering, perhaps a gift or a favor done without being asked. And it feels good because human beings are social creatures who respond to warmth with warmth. Then, usually after enough time has passed that the warmth has accumulated and the positive feeling is established, a request appears. Something significant enough that you might have hesitated or declined if it had been asked directly. But because of what has just happened, because of the warmth and the gifts and the compliments, declining feels different. It feels ungrateful. It feels like an imbalance. They gave, and now they are asking, and refusing means you are taking without giving back. This operates through a principle called reciprocity, one of the most deeply embedded drives in human social behavior. Receiving something activates a powerful impulse to give back. It is not a weakness or a flaw. It is the foundation of social cooperation, and it has been fundamental to human community for as long as humans have lived in groups. Manipulation exploits it by manufacturing the giving side of the equation, specifically to trigger the giving back impulse, not because of genuine generosity, but as a setup. The indication that this is manipulation rather than genuine kindness is usually the timing. Genuine warmth and generosity are consistent. Strategic warmth tends to appear specifically before significant requests and to diminish after those requests have been fulfilled. The fifth sign is pressure around time. You need to decide now. This offer expires tonight. Everyone else has already agreed. If you do not do this immediately, the opportunity will be gone. The urgency can be explicit, or it can be conveyed through tone and atmosphere, a sense that you are expected to respond before you have had a chance to think properly. The reason this works is straightforward and well documented in behavioral psychology. Careful, deliberate thinking takes time and cognitive resources. It involves weighing options, consulting your own values, gathering information, and sometimes asking other people's perspectives. Time pressure compresses or eliminates all of these steps. When you are required to decide immediately, your brain shifts from the slower, more analytical decision-making system to a faster, more instinctive one. And the faster system is considerably more susceptible to influence. Genuine decisions that are actually time-sensitive exist. They are not invented. But notice how often urgent pressure appears around decisions that benefit the person applying the pressure, and how often the urgency vanishes if you hold firm and take the time you need anyway. Real urgency is real, regardless of whether you comply with it. Manufactured urgency tends to dissipate when it fails to work. The sixth sign is perhaps the most concerning for its long-term effects, because it systematically removes the resources you would use to evaluate what is happening. Isolation does not always mean physically separating you from other people. It can look like your friends do not really understand your relationship. Do not tell your family about this. They will just make things worse. That friend of yours has always been jealous of you. Your coworkers would not get it. What all of these statements do is reduce the number of outside perspectives available to you. Outside perspectives are the most reliable check on manipulation, because manipulation typically requires a contained environment. A person who has access to a variety of trusted relationships, family, friends, colleagues, mentors, has multiple reality checks available. When one person tells them they are imagining things, they can test that against others' perceptions. When one person consistently blames them, they can ask whether that aligns with how other people experience them. Isolation is specifically designed to close off these checks, leaving the manipulator as the primary source of reality for the person they are manipulating. Why does your brain fall for isolation tactics? Because humans naturally defer to the people closest to them for social reality. When someone who occupies a close and significant position in your life tells you that outside relationships are unreliable or threatening, the impulse to protect the important relationship can override the impulse to maintain the broader social network. What is actually happening is the opposite of protection. The network is being dismantled specifically to make the manipulation easier. The seventh sign is so gradual that by the time it reaches its endpoint, you have already traveled a long distance from where you would have been willing to start. It is called the foot-in-the-door technique, and it works in exactly the way the name suggests. A small request is made, something easy to agree to, something that involves minimal commitment or cost. Then another small request. Then another. Each one slightly larger than the last, but each one anchored to the fact that you agreed to the previous one. By the time a genuinely significant request appears, there is a long-established pattern of agreement that makes refusing feel inconsistent with who you have been in this relationship. This technique works because humans have a powerful drive toward consistency, toward acting in ways that align with their past behavior and their self-image. Once you have agreed to several requests, saying no to the next one requires not just declining that specific request, but also revising your understanding of yourself as someone who agreed to everything prior. That is a higher psychological cost than simply continuing to agree. Sales uses this constantly, so do some charitable campaigns, some political campaigns, and, more relevantly to daily life, some people in your personal and professional world. The antidote is to evaluate each request individually, rather than in the context of a sequence. The question is not, have I been agreeing to this person's requests? It is, does this specific request make sense for me to agree to, right now, given what it actually involves? The eighth sign is flattery that feels unusually specific and unusually accurate. Someone who wants to influence you has often spent time noticing you, your insecurities, your ambitions, your fears, the things you most want to hear, and then reflecting those things back to you. This is sometimes called mirroring. You mention that you have always wanted to be recognized for your work, and suddenly they are consistently the person acknowledging your work. You express anxiety about a particular vulnerability, and they specifically address and soothe that anxiety. This does not feel like manipulation because it feels like understanding. And genuine understanding, the experience of having another person perceive and acknowledge who you actually are, is one of the most deeply meaningful experiences available in human connection. Skilled manipulators produce a convincing simulation of this experience without the substance, and the result is a powerful sense of attachment that can be difficult to examine critically because it feels so exactly right. The distinguishing factor between genuine understanding and strategic mirroring is usually time and consistency. Real understanding deepens over time and remains consistent regardless of whether it is serving the understander's interests. Strategic mirroring tends to intensify at moments when the manipulator wants something and to fade when their needs are met. The ninth sign is the persistent playing of the victim role. Something has always just happened to this person. They are always in a crisis, always being treated unfairly, always at the receiving end of other people's bad behavior. And somehow their own role in the situations they describe is consistently minimal or entirely absent. Every difficulty is external. Every conflict is someone else's fault. The reason this is effective as a manipulation tactic connects to one of the most reliable features of human psychology: empathy. We are wired to help people who are suffering. The suffering of others activates the same neural systems that process our own suffering, and this produces a genuine impulse toward helping, toward taking on something of the other person's burden. This capacity for empathy is one of the best things about human beings. Manipulating it is one of the most cynical things a person can do. The characteristic that distinguishes genuine vulnerability from performative victimhood is the relationship between the suffering and the request. Genuine vulnerability accepts help gratefully and maintains some ownership of the person's own situation. Manufactured victimhood tends to escalate. The crises grow bigger, the need for rescue becomes more regular, and there is usually an implicit or explicit message that your support is what stands between the person and disaster. The 10th sign builds on this directly. You begin to feel responsible for how this person feels. Their bad day becomes something you need to fix. Their unhappiness becomes your responsibility to address. Their frustration, disappointment, or anger is communicated in ways that make it clear the cause of all of these is you, your choices, your boundaries, your independent desires. In a healthy relationship, both people hold their own emotional experiences. They share those experiences with each other. They support each other. They influence each other's feelings, as close people inevitably do. But each person retains ownership of their own emotional state. Manipulation transfers this responsibility unilaterally. Living under this responsibility is exhausting, and it tends to progressively shrink the space in which the managed person can make free choices. The 11th sign is one of the most psychologically powerful on this list, because it works through a mechanism that is hardwired very deeply into human neurology. The behavior of the person is inconsistent, sometimes warm and loving and affirming, other times cold, distant, or punishing. And the inconsistency does not obviously correlate with anything you have done. You cannot predict which version you will encounter. And paradoxically, this unpredictability tends to increase rather than decrease your focus on and investment in the relationship. When positive responses are guaranteed, the brain learns quickly and then stops being particularly activated by them. When positive responses are unpredictable, when you sometimes get warmth and sometimes get coldness and cannot determine what makes the difference, the brain becomes focused on the outcome in a way that consistent reward simply does not produce. In relationships, this plays out as a heightened preoccupation with gaining approval and avoiding whatever triggers the coldness. You become highly attuned to the other person's moods. You spend significant energy trying to understand their patterns and please them consistently. The relationship becomes a primary focus in a way that serves the manipulator far more than it serves you. The 12th and final sign is less a behavior of the other person and more an internal experience of your own. You feel drained, you feel tired, you feel guilty without being entirely sure what you are guilty of. You feel like you needed to explain or justify yourself repeatedly. These feelings are not proof of manipulation. Relationships are complicated, and sometimes people who love each other genuinely exhaust each other without any manipulative intent. But as a pattern, as a consistent signature of how you feel after time with a specific person, these emotional states are worth paying attention to. Your nervous system is registering something. That registration may not be a verdict, but it is information. Why does manipulation work so broadly and so effectively across so many different contexts and relationships? Because it is not exploiting flaws in human psychology. It is exploiting features. The things that make you susceptible to manipulation are the same things that make you a functional, caring, connected human being. What manipulation does is take these features and redirect them, using the logic of care and connection to extract outcomes that care and connection are not supposed to produce. Understanding this is important because it removes the shame from being manipulated. You were not manipulated because you are weak or foolish. You were manipulated because you are human, and the tactics used were specifically designed for humans. The most common mistakes people make when thinking about manipulation are worth naming directly. Manipulation is not always dramatic and obvious. It is not limited to romantic relationships. It happens in families, friendships, workplaces, sales environments, online spaces, and in the design of systems and platforms. And manipulators are not always conscious of what they are doing. Some people have developed these patterns over a lifetime without ever naming them or examining them, and they deploy them automatically as their standard way of operating. Manipulation is not always loud. Sometimes it is a series of tiny adjustments, tiny pushes, small reframings, gradual expansions of what is expected, that collectively move you a significant distance from where you would have chosen to be. The reason understanding these patterns matters is not that it lets you catch every manipulator before they can influence you. It is that it builds the kind of self-knowledge and pattern recognition that makes each successive push a little less invisible. The more clearly you can see how these mechanisms work, the harder they become to run on autopilot. And some of the most important moments in that recognition are not when you identify manipulation in others, but when you notice the patterns in your own behavior. The places where you use guilt, the places where you apply pressure, the places where the tactics on this list feel, when you are honest, a little bit familiar from the inside as well as the outside. Understanding manipulation is not about who the bad people are. It is about understanding how influence actually moves between human beings and choosing, more deliberately, how you participate in that movement. Like and subscribe to Freud Mind for more.